Hi everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. We have a very special guest with us, Danny Matsukawa. Mr. Matsukawa is principal bassoon of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He has been a recipient of numerous awards and prizes, including a solo concerto debut in Carnegie Hall at age 18. Since then, he has appeared as a soloist with several orchestras, including the Philadelphia Orchestra, the National, Virginia, and Curtis Symphony Orchestras, the New York String Orchestra, the Auckland Philharmonia in New Zealand, and the Sapporo Symphony in Japan. He has participated in the Marlborough, Tanglewood, Aspen, Saito Kinen, and Pacific music festivals. Danny, it is amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing in these coronavirus times?
Well, first of all, thank you, Teddy, for having me. I really appreciate it. I think I applaud what you've been doing all summer. It's a tremendous thing. It's a great resource and platform, very important during this time. I think we're all feeling kind of lost during the summer. And so what you've been doing for so many bassoon players around has just been really great. So thank you for this. And also, I'm honored to be here. And by the way, for the record, I asked to be called Danny for this. So, and not that anyone would be aghast when Teddy said Danny. So just to let everyone know, I'm more than happy to be called that here. I'm doing well. It's my favorite time of year, September. I was just always that kid that one could call it weirdo that loved school. And growing up, I loved the fall. I loved the crisp autumn air, and then suddenly this feeling that we're all getting back. So it's always nostalgic. I feel a lot of nostalgia during this time, but right now it's obviously sort of very unfamiliar ground and territory where we are right now. So it's like bittersweet in the sense of like, yay, September's here and we're finally starting school. But we can all say it's been an extremely long summer, and that's obviously an understatement. And it does seem like I know, for example, some schools just started last week in orientation, and school will officially get up and running the day after Labor Day. But throughout all of this, it's important. I love these kinds of things just because it's really important to stay connected. Where we're all made to stay at home orders, whether it's quarantine or just for precaution, which I think is amazing. By the way, for all of you, and I'm not going to apologize for saying this, but please wear a mask. And I say this, I'm not going to apologize because some people will be like, oh, shame on him for getting political. It is not political. I just need to say that. And for anyone who might make it political, I don't know why it's become that. We're here to fight a virus, not each other. And I just don't know why this has become that. I don't know why it's become left versus right. I also feel like it's important to say that because sometimes, when I was younger and a student, it really mattered to me what teachers said, what professionals said. I'm not saying, oh, look at me. Please know that. And for any one of you who do know me, know that I'm not that person. But I'm just saying it because maybe there is a young person out there who maybe just needs to hear those words, just an extra added words of advice of please wear a mask. I don't mean to go on and on about this. I'm just saying, like, we're here to fight a virus and that's it. That's the bottom line. And we need to keep stopping the spread. So anyway, thank you, Teddy, again.
I
And for
completely agree
asking
with
me.
everything you said. We
Yeah.
have a lot of people in the audience agreeing as well.
Okay.
Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, that is really important. So I think without further ado, I will play everyone some recording for today's masterclass. But first, we need to introduce who's playing. So I'm going to bring him on camera. Um, let me do that real quick. There he is. Hi, Joshua. So go ahead, say hi to everyone, and we'll play everyone your recordings.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joshua Elmore. I just recently graduated from Juilliard with my bachelor's degree, studying with Judith LeClaire, and I am now a master's student at the Colburn School in Los Angeles, California, studying with Richard Bean.
Great. And today Joshua will be playing excerpts from Scheherazade and the Beethoven Violin Concerto. So I'm going to play everyone his Beethoven real quick, right there. Great, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So I will just leave you guys to uh, our little masterclass.
Great. So beautiful playing, Joshua. Bravo. And this is one of our gems. I'd love to, we can call it that because the Beethoven Violin Concerto, sometimes we, it's a joke where violin players will come up to us and say, "Oh, it's a great concerto for violin and bassoon," and I always chuckle because first of all, I love that they say that, but it's one of our one of these pieces that we can just really like relish and milk in so many ways. I mean, you really picked two of the gems in our repertoire, this and Scheherazade, which is another one that we can really milk. And that one even more so, and we'll get to that just because of the freedom and the nature of the context of that piece. But with the Beethoven, we're the first movement has great stuff. The second movement we all know is beautiful and lyrical. And then the third movement, this is one of those pieces. This is a great moment in this third movement where you hear the violin play it. And what's tricky about this is a lot of soloists, a lot of orchestras, a lot of conductors, when we get to this moment, suddenly, sort of ba-bum, ba-ba-da, ba-bum, ba-ba-da, da-dee-da-dee-da, da-da-da-dee, ba-bum, ba-ba-da, right? And then often is the case, we get to this, ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, bum, la-da-da-dee-dee-da-dee-dee-dee, la-da-da-da-da-da-dee-dee-dee. So there's a sense of, it's almost, wow, it feels like Menno, slightly slower. Now, it doesn't say that. And we all know Beethoven was crazy in a great way. He was sort of like one of these people who was very adamant about what he wrote, and he knew what he was writing, and he was one of these people who was obsessed, and he would stop at nothing until he would get it right for himself. So also his Sixth Symphony was I've said this in the past to many people. Forgive me if you heard this before, but he was one of the first ones, if not the first composer, to introduce like sentences. So he's talking about in his Pastoral Symphony, and he talks about the countryside, or the other movements by the brook, and then and so forth. And of course, we all know the storm movement and so forth. But we jump way ahead to like Mahler, who also wrote not just sentences, but often paragraphs. So Beethoven, he doesn't quite write here meno mosso, but it is a tradition where the violin does take it easy a little bit. I have heard it in tempo. Also, what I found, and I'll call it this, you can chuckle if you'd like, I call it unfair, that the violin plays, la da da dee, la da dee 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 dee. Like there's just like it's dreamy and they're so sentimental. And then comes, when we come in, they want us to like so they can go so they want to get back to this sort of showy, and they don't like it when we do or when we want to do what they just did. So it's like a very unfair moment. I'll call it that. That's not fair. You guys get to be operatic, and we are suddenly like forced to be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, metronomic. Now, that said, what do we know about Beethoven? Beethoven was one of these composers. We really cannot get away with a lot of push and pull, right? We really can't and I applaud you. Thank you for not doing that. Because sometimes when people do that, it's like, well, you can't really do too much vibrato. It's Beethoven. It's Beethoven. It's still like Yes, he was revolutionary, but he's still between classical and the very early start of romantic. But still, a lot of us think of him more along the lines of a classical period composer. And if you think of a lot of his pieces, especially the symphonies, there's not a lot of um, rubato or risks taken like the Scheherazade is going to be. So something like this, la da da dee 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 dee. The question is, how much can we do, or can we do anything? And I think the best word here is subtle. So in that case, what can we do? So it's like bolero. What comes to mind when we play bolero? For me, it's just two things. It's rhythm, absolutely. Everyone will always say that, no matter what. And anyone on the committee, a panel, and anyone taking any audition on whatever instrument they're playing, they'll always say bolero, rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. And number two is colors. I always say this, colors galore for bolero, because we cannot, play too much of this because we have the snare drum and everything, and so we're not allowed to really do a lot of the slowing down and then suddenly catching up, making up for lost time, as is often the case when it comes to rubato, which is robbing or borrowing of time. So something like Beethoven Violin Concerto Last Movement. Obviously, if I sing this, you'll probably smile. Da 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 dee 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 dee, da 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 dee dee da da dee. Like, yeah, this was maybe late Italian opera, yeah, sure, but this is not. But yet at the same time, da la da da dee 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 dee, la da 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 dee, da 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 dee 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 da da da. Gil Shaham was an old friend of mine. We went to like pre-college together, so I've known him since we were both teenagers. He once came up to me after he was playing it, soloing it with us, and he's like, I hope I don't ruin this for the rest of your life. I'm like, uh-oh. And we're like, already laughing. He goes, but it's kind of like a jig, isn't it? It's like, there once was a woman from Spain. And I was like, no, don't like this. But it was really funny because it is kind of like that. It's kind of like a limerick. So,
Absolutely.
right. However, when we play this, especially and often when we are working on something like this, we want to think about it in an audition. And so my encouragement when we prepare an excerpt like this for an audition is, given all that I just said, classical style, we must respect the composer and the period. There's not a lot of rubato, as we just talked about. And he doesn't write a whole lot of dynamics too, right? So we have this later, do, re, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, so, fa, mi, re, right? He writes that there. He writes the little hairpin on those notes. But for the most of it, I mean, if you could correct me, because you have the music in front of you, correct me if I'm wrong, there's not really anything written, right? Dynamically
No.
speaking.
No.
Right. So what does that mean? So my impression when I hear you play it is beautiful sound, great rhythm, and intonation is really great. So um, is that it? So obviously you're a great musician and I can hear that. So luckily it doesn't mean, okay, those three things are there and the rest is not. I don't mean that, but in fact, I want to kind of maybe push you maybe even further along the lines of what you're doing with the musicality of it. We can call it the musicality of it. So that said, when I think of something like this, I really think about shaping. And I think, so for example, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you mind singing it or trying?
Yeah. Bye.
Great, beautiful. And what I loved about that is you sing it very naturally. And I know I sound like a broken record for those of you who've heard me speak before. It's such a great tool to sing. We sing, then play, then sing, then play, because we're not thinking about this and this long thing and this tiny thing that controls our lives often and our breathing and so it's the most natural way to create music and make phrases. So you just sang it beautifully and musically. So I would say when I heard you play, the first note that caught my ear right away was your G. though, the held G, and you didn't sing it that way. La da da dee 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 da 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 da. So you hear how I'm just sort of sitting on it. La da da
Right.
dee 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 da la da 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 da. So let's work with that a little bit. What do we want to do? So sometimes, a note will come away. Sometimes it'll just be sustained, and sometimes, as we know it, it will develop. So what do we want to do with this note here? So why don't you play it for us? Because that was the thing that really caught my ear when listening to it through the first time. Great, great. And would you agree, and I'm not trying to put this on me at all, please know that. Would you agree that you were more mindful about it? And
Yes, absolutely.
therefore it didn't sound like it was like you were not letting up, but it felt a little bit more natural and at ease. And to
Yep.
me, that those are the kinds of things that we can pay someone like you, who's such a great player, and you're so, I mean, to say advanced is like an understatement, because advanced to me sounds like, oh, someone who's like really good in high school and about to go to we have beginner, intermediate, advanced. So you're past
Right.
advanced, like you're already an artist, and I mean that. And so someone like you, it doesn't take a lot. So someone like you, it's really just a matter of, oh, right, I really, really, I can and I will spend more detailed, um, we can call it notices, to notice these things, identify, often I encourage people, the beginning of your note is so important, as well as the end of your notes. And of course, all in between. But sometimes,
Right.
we don't want ta, right? But we also don't want ta, beautiful attack, but then ta, like the end of the note be all clippy and abrupt. So it's important, again, how we start a note. Of course, depending on the context, if it's simply fantastique, we're not looking for a beautiful, lush, cushiony attack, do, 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 do. That would be
Right.
disgusting. And that's not a march to the scaffold. Right? So it depends on the context. We do need a little bit more ta. Something like Shostakovich 9, I play with a lot of sarcasm, like quite cynical. So again, those little, you can call it extra steps, really make a difference in a character, in an emotion, in a context. Again, back to the period thing, what era are we in, and composer, and also the context of the movement, even within Beethoven, not all one size fits all, as we know. So same with held notes. I'd like you to maybe think about that after today, maybe a little bit more about your held notes. So same with your high D, la da da dee 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 dee, and then I heard la da 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 dum. I understand, and it does. I applaud you. You're going to beautifully the right place. I would go ya da 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 dee, and then the B flat still belongs to the D, and then something new now picking up two pickup notes, la la dee da da dee 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 dee. So I think you're doing a great job going to the D, but then you should come away. So I feel like
Okay.
it's da 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 dee dum. So again, the tiny little, we call it nuances, and we can call it inflection. I love nuances, I love inflections, and I love colors in our playing. So let's go for that now. Do that again. Good. And I like the way you play the second G. But again, ultimately, it's up to you. The first one, it sounded like you were kind of coming away, but I think I would still prefer that rather than just a sustained la da da dee 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 da 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 da. It's like it's just sort of a full
Right.
note. This time you went la da da dee da 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 la da 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 da, and that was okay. But then the second time, which is okay too, by the way, to change it up. La da 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 dee 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 la da da da. You then developed, or what I like to call blossomed. You blossomed on that, bloomed on that note, and you were blossoming on that note. So good. Now let's go on to the second one and do. I wasn't hearing or able to hear this through my headphones. Do re fa mi re do re mi so fa mi re. Okay, so what's the dynamic written?
Piano dolce.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm going to give you a lot of credit here because we're doing this through Zoom and headphones or microphones or whatever we have. Um, but my impression as a listener is that you're on a mission, you know, and I want that feeling of dolce, that feeling of piano. Now, when it comes to real time, we can't really play like I play this much healthier than a piano in the orchestra. But at the same time, I'm surrounded by, like I'm in the middle of the woods, like literally because of string players. Like we're, I'm not trying to call them like the forest, but it's like, we're surrounded by other people and other instruments. And so I feel like it's okay. But when we're playing alone, what do we do at an audition, right? Do we play it piano? And then is the committee going to ask, well, this person doesn't have a lot of experience because they'll never be heard, right? But then do we play forte? And then will the committee say, well, they're not doing the dynamics. It says piano, right? So how do we, I hate this word, but I'm going to have to use it. How do we sell it? How do we sell it? So we need to really think about that. So give me that less, I think a lot of it is more the feeling that there's this feeling now that it's again, you're trying to maybe put it out there too much. Bring us in a little bit. Also, careful when you do do re fa mi re do. That I'm guilty of this myself. Sometimes the throat gets in the way of the swellness of it, and then it kind of cuts into the sound and maybe even borderline intonation. The only intonation thing I heard in the recording, by the way, is the end of the very first solo, your very last D. You sagged a little bit. So it's one of those, as you take the instrument away from your mouth, just make sure it's like what I was saying a moment ago. The beginnings of the notes and the ends of the notes are so important. And those tiny little details too. So it was like, la da da dee 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 da 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 da. The second one, la da da dee da da dee, la da la da da la dee dee dee. You just heard me, da, like I kind of tapered down. I love the fact that you didn't go sharp, and I love the fact that you're probably very cognizant of bassoon players tend to go sharp, especially when we're trying to taper beautifully. But we also don't want to like let the notes sag as we're maybe releasing our embouchure. But okay, go back to the second one. Do re fa mi re do. Okay, and don't worry about that. That's just, for me, that means just the air push, keep blowing the air through all the way. I think maybe it's not one of these psychs, but do, re, fa, mi, re, do. Maybe come down a little bit on that C. But then you could really do a nice hairpin. And then same with the D. Good. And the other thing you need to decide, or you could decide if you wish, is where do we go to in the hairpin? And where in terms of the beat? Because I often don't want to think about it, and also where in terms of what level of dynamic, right? So I feel like you went to a forte in the second eighth note. That's how I hear it. and I would prefer you to go
Okay.
almost maybe an eighth or two notes, an eighth or two later. So do re fa mi re do, as opposed to do re fa mi re do. Do you hear how quickly I went on this
Yeah.
swell? So
Yeah.
maybe just pace it out a little bit because it's a whole measure, right?
Right. Yeah.
Other than the grace note. I mean the pickup eighth note. Um, Also, for inquiring minds out there, I've heard people play this pickup too short. It does have a Beethoven-esque, maybe some editions have a caret, some editions might even have a dot. I will sing it to you to hopefully answer your question. Da da dee da da da, da da dee 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 dee. So I think too short is not the answer. And I'm hoping that most of you are smiling when I sing it that way. And again, you can do that for yourselves. You can do that at home. I say this to all of my students. You will be your best teacher. And, just you have to try these different things, but you will always be your best teacher. And you can hear that yourself. You almost don't need me to tell you these things, or anyone, or any teacher, or coach, or conductor. Okay, last time, and then we'll move on to Scheherazade. Good. And I might do, again, I will use the word subtle. Re, si, sol, la, fa, re, sol, la, si, do, re, mi. Maybe a touch of what we might call butter or something,
Right.
you know. Just to the left. Too much.
Okay.
Right. So you're gonna have to right. You're gonna have to figure that out. It's a
Right.
tiny bit. It's like a wink, you know. Or you can choose another place. The la da da dee da da la da 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 la la da 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 da. Right? Now, the way I sang it, would you think that was too much and grotesque?
No.
And you're allowed to tell me again, art is interpretive, right? But I think we want to avoid the ba da da dee da 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 dee 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 off. We're
Right.
done, right?
Right.
So again, give me that sense. Okay, last time. Good. Even a little more. Let's do a little bit more. Yeah, something. Good. And just for fun, because sometimes why not? And I usually don't like double whammies, but do a little bit on the G as well as the D at the end. Good. Yeah, I think it sounds great. I
Yeah.
myself wouldn't say, whoa, what is this person doing? That's too much. He has to know there's no rubato in Beethoven. I didn't hear that. Instead, I actually heard tastefulness and non metronomic, right?
Right.
So for all of you out there listening, it's okay to do a little bit. Again, know the composer terms and know the context. Know what's too much and know what's not enough. And that's the best way to put it. And again, when in doubt, sing it different ways, play it different ways, tape yourself. Sometimes you'll find the answer there. Sometimes you'll find the answer with the harmony and the score underneath. Um, and sometimes you'll find the answer obviously by like singing it many different ways, but even singing it wrong. Like what I mean by that is you wouldn't go da 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 dee da 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 la da 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 dee 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 da, right? Just randomly pick a note. Then you'll be like, yeah, that just sounds like I'm trying to be musical. And look, everyone, I'm musical. I'm holding one note. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
So we know that there are certain points in the phrase where one can do that. And we have to know and find those spots. And then again, the question is how much, right?
Right.
Okay, good. Let's go to the Scheherazade. Bravo.
Great, wonderful. So I'm gonna play Joshua Scheherazade for you guys. Yes. Great. So that was Joshua's Scheherazade.
Great, beautiful, beautiful, Joshua. Um, yeah, this is one of those. We just talked about Beethoven and how sometimes he gives us information, and he might just write allegro, as often was the case for Mozart. Here we have andantino, dolce espressivo, capriccioso, quasi recitando. What am I missing? Soloist, right? Solo espressivo. So that's quite a lot of instruction, right? Andantino, quasi recitando, dolce espressivo, capriccioso. Anything else? Anything I miss?
No,
Okay.
no.
I One could just say the obvious, as any teacher might just ask. Well, what does that all mean? Let's just break it down. What does it all mean? The andantino
So
is
right. Slowly, slow,
ish.
sort of
What's slower,
ish. I think
andante or
it's a little fast.
andantino?
Andantino is slower than andante, right?
Um, that's also interpretive. That's also interpretive. It's like
Mm.
asking, is più forte louder or softer than forte,
Mm.
right?
Right.
Um, I think there are it's one of those things we can even maybe Teddy, who's our, middleman here, he can quickly Google it, andantino versus andante. Um, and I always, in my head, I always thought of andantino as even more of a walking, flowing tempo than andante.
Mm.
Another giveaway is are we in 3/8 or are we in 3/4?
3/8.
Right. So sometimes for me that indicates 3/8 is a little bit more flowing as opposed to quarter notes. He could have written it in quarter notes, right?
Right.
That's again interpretive. That's my over the years of like thinking about it. Go on. Dolce espressivo. Dolce
Sweet,
means
expressive,
right.
sweet and expressive.
Go on. Capriccioso.
Sort of like lively, light, dance like,
Yeah, capricious as
very
we know it.
capricious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. According to Wikipedia, andantino is faster. Yes. I don't mean to be like yes, but yeah, it does. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why I always just like thought of it that way. I'm not like, um, yeah, I don't know. Like I'm just trying to think of other words that are similar to that. I feel like are you know what it means to me? It's like you have a sonata and you have a sonatina. A sonatina is like a smaller version, you know, of a
Mm-hmm.
sonata. Sonata to me could be like this big, you know, good piece, and sonatina is
Mm-hmm.
cuter. And I feel like andantino is cuter than andante, so it's a little bit like, yeah, okay, good. And quasi recitando, very important.
Um, Sort of not really in time,
Hmm.
but yes and no in time. So it's sort of like this middle ground of like it should be free but not totally out of tempo.
Good. What is totally out of tempo? What would that be?
Sort
That would be called,
cadenza
yes, good for you.
or
And
a recitative.
quasi is, I think you said it, right? Quasi is sort of. Quasi means somewhat,
Sort of, yeah,
right? And recitando
yeah.
is like a recitative, which, as we know from like Handel's like oratorios, recitative, it's like spoken words in a sort of freestyle with usually with harpsichord, usually like some kind of like not monotone melody, but something like that, like a monotonous melody.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's that's not the point. The point is like it's somewhat free, like as if in speech. And so, okay, so back to this, I wouldn't mind you going more for that. Now, over the years,
Mm-hmm.
grown, sometimes for the better, sometimes for maybe not. We can say all the different things. I'm not at all going to be self-deprecating, but I'll just say that like we can call it I've matured. And so I'm not saying I'm no longer, or I'll put it this way. I'm not saying I am missing that young capriciousness that I once maybe had when I was a teenager. I don't mean it that way, but as I'm getting older and wiser, as I think everyone does, I have sort of taken in with this excerpt feeling like, I think it's okay to be to do a little bit more than I always thought was okay, was expected. I don't want to like stop everything and be like, oh, everyone, look at me, orchestra. Now you're about to hear an essay on the bassoon. Of course, I don't mean that, but it's
Right.
but again, I feel like you know we don't also need to be too much like just straight through. So let's work on this a little bit, just in terms of comfort. Yeah, and we don't want to do too much, like almost like the Beethoven, but obviously we are allowed to do much more than Beethoven.
Right.
Great. Yeah, Joshua, you sound so beautiful. You're really, really a beautiful player. Um,
Thank you.
the and you do um, take a nice I don't mean to call it echo effect, but you get suddenly quieter in the second, right? Suddenly the mi fa so fa. I do the same thing. I take the echo there. Um, there are two ways to think of it this way. Sometimes we can think of it two, 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 meaning la da dee dee dee, la da dee, la da 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 dee, la da dee dee dee, la da dee. That's one way. Or la da dee, la da 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 da, la da dee, ya da 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 da, da 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 dee. So I do that as well. I do what you are doing as well. I did notice one E, and only because we were on this topic earlier. The end, da la da 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 da. The E is especially notorious, not of you or from you, but where we can get like kind of droopy at the very tail end of the release. Just to be careful of that. Now, I often like to think of this as Jekyll and Hyde. For all of you young people out there may not know what that is. Um, Jekyll and Hyde is this. He's like a mad scientist when he's Dr. Jekyll, and then he drinks this potion that he made, and he becomes this sort of monstrous character, Mr. Hyde. So it's like la da 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 dee, la da da dee, da da da. To me, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde moment where I completely change characters. Now, we can think of it in a more romantic way because it is quite a romantic piece, um, you know, and maybe think of it as a beautiful Dolce singing, hey, I'm a very sweet, loving person, but I can also be you know, mischievous and playful. But I do tend to still love being, and in terms of being the narrator, you can really show that more. And I want to kind of get you to do that because I think you're kind of doing it already, or you are doing it, but do even more. So go for even more,
Okay.
what I would call even more lyricism. Um, I one time I'll just tell this in a way that, and maybe one or two you've heard me say this story before. once had to sit on a committee for associate concertmaster auditions, and Scheherazade, among Heldenleben and all these, Missa Solemnis, these great violin solos, because it's an associate concertmaster position, they had a lot of, the solo violin excerpts of the orchestral repertoire. And we all know Scheherazade, like it starts the whole piece, dee bum ba dee da 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 dee, and then suddenly you hear the violin, dee da 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 dee da da dee, who is this for based on Arabian Nights and 1001 Nights and the stories, and each night she tells the story, she's able to keep her life going because the Tsar back then was notorious to he would marry someone and at the end of the wedding night just behead his new wife, and but she knew this, and so she brilliantly would tell a story and kept him what we would now call binge watching, kept him on a cliffhanger every night where he wanted to tell more until finally he fell in love with her and married her for good forever. But basically Scheherazade is this woman, and then the second movement is called, I think, Calendar Prince. So again, it's this wooing, now, so my anecdote, what I was saying a moment ago about the audition was, of all the many violin excerpts in this symphony, the one excerpt when I was serving on the committee behind the screen was the beginning of the second movement. So I was like, how can you guys do this to me? So it was always like, ya la dee, ya dia. And I wanted to be like from the other side of the screen, I'm here, someone hand me my bassoon. And I wanted to go, dia la dee, da da dee, dia da dee, And,
Right.
we heard like, but especially in the later on, it was like semifinals. So we heard like 15 to 20 of them. And I was like, you guys
Wow.
don't know what you're doing to me. And it was literally one of those, someone hand me my bassoon. And why do I tell that story, an anecdote, is I would love for everyone to feel that way when they're playing. And I would love everyone to hear that when listening, that there's this sense of like, I'm here and you're the love of my life and I've missed you all this time and you're on the other side of the screen and I'm wooing you, And so find a way to now communicate that through your bassoon. So ya la dee. Okay. Beautiful. Is there some way you can make the very ending even more lush? It doesn't sound angular, but I want it to sound as less angular or as least angular as possible. La da 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 dee. It's almost like I'm singing it this way. Da la dia la da dia la da dee. And I'll give you the example. I'll exaggerate as angular. Da 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 ta la da ta la da ta. You didn't play like that, but I'm trying to get you to even more lush in that dee la dia la da dee la da da. Good. And careful with the last note. You did the droop thing again. And make sure that it doesn't feel, and I'm going to, again, probably blame the miking and your AirPods. It make sure that it doesn't sound like you're hitting your ceiling and that you're not letting up. So make this, leave a little room for, one's imagination or for one to think, oh, like that's just so beautiful, rather than, wow, I know it's beautiful, but hey, just let up a little bit, that kind of thing. Now, the very beginning, how much what's the length? How short is too short? And I think again, that's for you to play with in your practice room. So I'll sing it a couple of ways. Dia-da-dum, da-da-dum, dia-da-dum, dia-da-dee, dee-da-dum, dia-da-dum, dia-da-dee, dee-da-da, dia-da-dum, dum. Maybe that's too long, right? But maybe dia-da-dum,
Hmm.
da-da-dum, dia-da-dum. I don't think you were too short, but it's making me talk about it. So maybe, yeah, maybe
Right.
just add a touch more what I would call tail at the end of those notes, that it doesn't sound too, yeah, clipped or choppy. Just the beginning. Yeah, I like that more personally. Again, you'll probably have
Right.
someday another teacher or conductor say they want it shorter, or someone might say long. Um, what I love about this solo is what's going on in the bottom in the orchestra underneath you in the score.
Basically, just a harp and a drone.
Right. So what's the drone?
The drone is a B,
Right. And
and
who's playing
then
it?
it's in the cellos and the basses.
Right. So basically, that's all they're doing. Right. And then what
Hmm.
happens when the oboe comes in? Who has it right after
Becomes,
us?
I think it becomes a lot more involved. I think more instruments get involved.
Well, yeah. And this
I
is
think the
actually
harp
where the
becomes a
harp
little more
really,
active.
the harp
Right.
plays like every chord and almost every beat. So in other words, when the oboe comes in, the conductor really has to kind of lead the group, at least the ensemble underneath the oboe solo. And what I love about our solo is this is often what I get from conductors. Literally. So it's like, ya la
Right.
dee la dee la. They just do this, which to me is an invitation. Like I invite you to do whatever you
Hmm.
want. And then, dee la da da. That's the only change. They now go from a B to a low A pedal, right? And only here
Hmm.
will the conductor change. And throughout my career, I've done this a number of times. Like only one time a conductor conducted the whole bassoon solo. So it's like dee la dee da dee da da ya da dum bum, and I didn't like it to a point where I started taking a little more time, and he was going like dee da dum da da dee dee dee, and I think each night he did less and less conducting. And I think finally the last night he just kind of like, I wasn't trying to teach him. But my point was, okay, the good thing is he was kind of letting me do what I wanted, but it almost felt like, well, then why are you being so like rigid? Yeah, this was many, many
Insistent,
years
right?
ago. And it's not someone who, um, he was a really good conductor and a good musician. So it wasn't at all like everything he did this. It was very confusing. But for most of the time, you'll probably get conductors who will just kind of give you an invitation. Okay, great. Do you have any
Hmm.
questions before we go to general questions? Even about these
No,
two
thank you.
excerpts or
Nope.
just about anything? Yeah.
Mm, nope. Nope.
Okay. Well, you sound beautiful, my friend. You really do. Keep up the great
Thank you
work.
so much.
I
Thank
got
you so
lucky.
much.
I got lucky in this class that I got to, have you as the one to I get to hear and listen to. So, I also remember very
Thank you so
fondly
much
you.
for your time.
I remember fondly at Juilliard as well. I came to visit once for Masterclass, and you played, and back then
Hmm.
too, I was very impressed. So it's great to hear you again years later,
Thank you.
and you still have your same smiley warmth about you. So don't lose those two things. Don't lose your very
Absolutely.
infectious personality and your beautiful playing. Keep it up. I
Thank
know
you.
I'll hear
Thank you so
more of
much.
you. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
So Teddy.
So, yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. So, I think we are going to turn to general Q&A now.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we have a
If there are
couple.
any,
Yes, we have
maybe.
a nice handful of questions.
Okay.
So, the first question is anonymous, and they ask, was there an experience, for example, a particular summer festival orchestra convert masterclass, studies with a particular teacher, etc., that you feel were really formative in developing your musicianship when you were a student?
Whew, that's a great question. I credit, I think the best way to answer that is without evading the question and being very general, not trying to be very general. My encouragement for all of you out there is take from everywhere. Take from every experience, every festival, every school rehearsal, every school concert, every festival rehearsal, every festival concert, every guest conductor, every regular conductor. I was lucky when I was a student, we had a great um, conducting teacher who, in, he was the conductor in residence at school, and his name was Otto Werner Mueller. And to maybe specifically answer that question, I hold him responsible for a lot of the great many things I learned about orchestra playing. Like I really I learned so much from him single-handedly about like how to play an orchestra. From my very first rehearsal with him, it was about, oh, I have to know my role in the score. It's not just about playing beautifully, showing up, playing in tune, having good attacks, good rhythm, good, good dynamics, playing in a good ensemble, playing with other people, listening and phrasing well and playing in the right style, these things that we talked about too earlier with Joshua. Um, I really learned so much just in terms of orchestral IQ. And I love that. I'm going to put it that way. Like, I really got a lot of orchestral IQ out of him. Um, and it's, uh, it's really knowing your role, knowing your function, what's going on. If you have a big, beautiful, juicy D above the staff, and I can sing on it and be like, wow, I love this note, and then I realize it's a flute solo, then you quickly learn you're not allowed to just have free reign and just milk that D that you might love on the bassoon. Or I love high G on the bassoon. It's such a rich, resonant note. But it can't be like, oh, sweet, like I get to like, really ham up this G. It really like you have to understand like, oh, right now there's something else going on in the orchestra. And so I learned those critical things just in terms of like orchestral playing from him. And I in terms of other teachers, go to many master classes. Don't just go to even bassoon master classes. Observe string master classes. Observe voice master classes. All these, like, you really will get a lot from all these places. Please do not limit yourselves to just bassoon learning. And even in terms of bassoon learning, another great example analogy is how to make reeds. Like, I did not learn how to make reeds from one person. I learned a lot of my reed making from classmates. My teachers, one showed me how to make reeds, another one showed me how they made reeds, another one showed me how they made reeds. I've had, a few teachers, and then I've had a lot of classmates throughout those, years and time at school. And ultimately, you will take and leave, or give and take. We can say that. Take it or leave it. Like, there are things I'm like, wow, I really like that. That fits well with my physique, my embouchure, my setup, my bassoon, my vocal, all of the above. And there are things that just don't work for me, and I will leave them. But my point is, like, ultimately, you will evolve your own reed style, what fits for your setup. And again, we're all physically made differently, of course, naturally. So if that answers the question, if there is one person just in terms of orchestral playing, I'd learned a lot from Mueller. Um, I did study with Bernard Garfield, who was also great. And I loved him. And I was able to hear him every week at the orchestra. So right there was a lesson too in terms of orchestral playing. But also it wasn't just from him as much as I adored him. I learned so much from hearing, Richard Woodhams and Jeffrey Kaner and so forth and so forth, all these other great players, wherever I was in any orchestras. And I'm not even just talking about the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was at school. Wherever I went to, and if I went to visit on the road, if I'm in Europe, I would absolutely try to listen to any orchestra just to get a sense of like what other people are doing. And it should never be like, well, I like what I'm doing and therefore I'm good. And please, those of you listening, don't ever feel that way. Don't ever feel that way, because hubris is not a good thing. It really is not a good thing. Okay, next question.
Okay, great, thank you. So our next question is also anonymous, and they ask, your legato is consistently inspiringly beautiful. How do you recommend practicing to improve legato and, quote, fold the intervals up the way a singer does?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. It's a huge compliment. I really appreciate hearing that. Yeah, I think, legato is something I worked on a lot in my younger days because I really wanted things to sound liquidy or silky or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not saying that's just me. We all like have different things in our lives. At one point I wanted to have better staccato, and so I worked on that too. One time I wanted to have better control of my vibrato. But there was definitely a time where I thought like I really want to have good and great legato and better connectivity. The biggest compliment once came from a clarinet player. He's now principal of Dallas Symphony, Greg Graydon, an old friend of mine. And he was like, "My God, your legato." And I was like thinking, "Wow!" Like coming from a clarinet player, because clarinets for them, I mean, we can just say it's the nature of the instrument. It's just liquidy by nature. We often kind of like yell at them when they do too much noodling, in fact, because everything sounds like noodles. It's like but when a clarinet player like tells you that your legato is good. So to answer the question, I'm sorry, I did not mean to sound like a boastful self compliment. It just meant like what is it that they do, the clarinet players? And another good friend of mine, Michael Rusnik, when I was in school with, and he doesn't anymore. And this wasn't even a bad thing. But at one point, I heard him leaking a little air, but he had such a great legato. But one thing always caught my ear was his air is consistent, like as he's like really like playing a phrase. And I like that right there was like, oh, so a lot of it is just keep blowing, keep blowing. He doesn't play with a leak, and it wasn't like it was a big noticeable leak, but it was enough, especially when I'm sitting next to him, that I could hear it. But it was enough to teach me that that's what it takes to create legato. So maybe I'm throwing compliments out there to various colleagues and stuff, but at the end of the day, I'll put it this way: as a bassoon player, our wind support is our bow arm. Our wind, our diaphragm, our air support is our foundation. How do we create a sound? This way, right? We all know this. So it's like the bow arm. And so how do string players play with vibrato? With their left hand, whether it's a cello or whether it's a violin. They do this, right? But their bow arm is still constant, right? And so this has nothing to do with this. Now take it one step further. How do they change notes? Same with this. It's their fingers on their left hand. So they're going dee da 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 dee, but their bow arm, unless they're doing portato, and of course we're not talking about changing the strings. Of course that'll also change a note. But I'm just talking about the basic. True legato is their bow is staying while they're moving their fingers. So same with on the bassoon. Same with on the bassoon. So one time, many times actually, for students, I would do this exercise where I tell them, play a D, and they would play a D. And then I would take my hand and I would go, while they're playing a D, I would suddenly go, they're playing da, and then I'll suddenly put down their finger. They didn't know I was gonna change, and then I'll lift it up again. Then I'll put it down, and then they'll think I'm lifting it up, and I'm not yet, then I'll lift it up. And they don't know when I'm changing, But the legato is absolutely perfect because they're not shifting their air when they're shifting their fingers. So then I would say, okay, now your turn. You play a D and then play a C when you think you're going to, but don't do it when you're going to do it. Do it before or after and psych yourself out. And they'll be like, what? Oh, okay. So then they'll play da, and then they're about to change and they notice that, but then they'll like do it sooner or they'll do it right after. And they're like, whoa, I didn't shift my air. It's like, right. And for whatever reason, when we play a scale, like let's say F major, a lot of us end up going da ya da 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 da, right? We're doing this on every note, and for whatever reason, our fingers tell the guys upstairs, tells the brains to tell the guys downstairs, hey, we're shifting, shift with us. So we end up going, it's almost like we're revamping. The air is still going, but we're almost doing a tiny air shift with our fingers. And that's not true legato. So the true legato is keep the air one constant flow and then only move the fingers, not the air. And I love the saying, move the fingers, move the notes on the air. Don't move the air on the notes. And I love that. So a lot of us, we're very guilty, all wind instruments, not just bassoons, very guilty of when we shift the fingering, we shift our air slightly. It's a slight indentation. That's how I'll call it. And so really work on imagining your air just going through your instrument from here all the way through, even out your bell. You can think of it that way, like an imaginary wind, like it's as if it's like a animation. You can picture the wind cartoon or whatever going through your instrument, and that really helps your legato. Now, in terms of intervals, I really take a lot of time working on this, and for me, a lot of it is, and I like to say this: a person never jumps like this, a person jumps like this. So we want to fulfill those intervals. We never want to hit the top note. I feel like universally speaking, a lot of us go da ya, but really musically to fulfill the interval is da da rather than da ya, right? And to me, that's not good fulfillment. That's not good filling the gap, and that's also not good connectivity. So work on that stuff in terms of technically speaking, which will then ultimately get you closer to like a voice, a singing, and that liquidity that we're looking for. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So our next question is from Karen, my teacher. She asks,
Hi,
when you
Karen.
conduct, do you have any pet peeves for the bassoon section? What are the common issues that orchestral bassoonists face in the ensemble?
Wow. Hi, Karen. And that's a great question. Yeah, it's funny. A pet peeve of mine, and this is personal, just not like personally, like meaning it's just my own feeling, like interpretive. So, is as a bassoonist, I myself am allergic to bassoony sounds. What does that mean? So it means when something sounds, I'm going to try to do what I always yell at my students not to do. Kindly, I yell at them kindly. But, so we have and it'll probably sound awful with this, but that's a good thing. And especially when the mic's close to the reed. I don't know if any of you have ever recorded yourselves and you have a microphone that's close to your reed. It sounds like awful because it just sounds raspy and reedy. So to each their own, and I'm not saying yay or nay, right or wrong. Please know that it's not. It's a school. We can call it this. I'm from a maybe it's because I grew up with recordings of the Berlin Philharmonic and recordings of Milan Turkovic as soloist and Kostuma. Like maybe that has affected my hearing, my ear, what's in my ear. A lot of what we know about bassoon sound comes from what we hear internally, which we then want to produce. So I call this the Tangoid experiment, only because I was a student at Tangoid at the time. But there was someone who was quite a bright player and someone who was quite a dark player. And just for fun, I was like, hey, can you both switch everything, including reeds? And the brighter player still sounded bright, and the darker player still sounded dark on the exact same, setup, only reverse. So to me, that told me like no matter what you hear in your sound, your body's going to want to create that sound that you're used to creating. So my own personal pet peeve when I conduct is I get allergic to bassoony sounds. So my students know when I say that just sounded bassoony, they're like, uh-oh. It's not necessarily a great thing. It's because it's like, so for example, we'll hear, oh my God, completely dry. All right, well, clearly I've been talking too much. But if we hear that, for example, and I'll make the exaggeration. It's hopefully it's coming through as sounding quite reedy. I won't use the word buzzy or bright because again, like that's also interpretive, right? I've actually heard people describe bright and dark, but they actually were saying the same thing. So therefore, I've like left those words alone. And I've also heard people go, and I'm like, what? Why? Why? What was with that B flat? And they're like, oh, because it felt good. Like, what? Like you, like no one would ever go bum bum beam bum bum da bum bum. A singer wouldn't subtly do that. And so my pet peeve is every now and then I'll hear sounds when I'm conducting that um, reminds me of. Let me put it this way. My greatest compliment is to any instrumentalist is when they make me forget what instrument they're playing, and I only hear art and music. And I'm not just trying to be philosophical here or poetic or cheesy. Please know that. But my pet peeve, what one could call it from bassoon section, is when they remind me, oh yeah, that's the bassoon. When it just sounds rather, you know, reedy, and it's like, oh yeah, it's a reed instrument. Another way to look at it is as I was leaving the National Symphony to come to Philly, Leonard Slatkin, who was a music director at the time, sat near me because it was the finals, and he just wanted like sort of a person just to um, not be an advisor or consultant, but we can call it that because this was our instrument. But we get to the finals, and he says, "Tell me, Danny, why is it that some players I hear the reed and others I hear the bassoon?" And he says, "I want to hear the great, rich wooden quality of the bassoon." And here I'm thinking, he's just a conductor. Like he's a pianist and he plays viola. Like I thought us bassoon players, we're very like detailed to listening that to those kinds of things. Like this is our instrument, so we can hear that the fine-tuned, again the very tiny little discrepancies. And I was just like thinking, okay, this goes to show that if someone who doesn't play bassoon can hear it, and not just a bassoonist, I happen to be a bassoonist, and when I conduct, I hear it even more, perhaps. That just made me think, oh, everyone can hear it. And again, also, there might be people who like that. Stefan Zweigert, who I is also a friend, and I love his playing in Principal Berlin. This has nothing to do with bright or dark, but he said like Karajan was like this with the bassoon. Abado, we often got the hand, not because he didn't like he thought we were too loud. I think that's just what. And then Simon is like Simon Rattle loved the bassoon, and so he was often like, yeah, give it, give it. So I think that to me speaks more to like it depends on the person. There are conductors who just want to hear a lot more bassoon. Same with recording engineers, by the way. That's another pet peeve of mine. Is some recording engineers sometimes I hear like, wow, that's a lot of bassoon. Maybe I'm not almost too flattered. And then sometimes I'm like, I can barely hear the bassoon, and it has a big bassoon part. And I feel awful being that person to suddenly whine and complain and be like, hey, I hate to ask, but can I hear a little bit more of my solo? And then I feel like, not like, yeah, like I'm just complaining and that I'm just trying to make it more about me. But again, it could be interpretive. And it's like maybe part of it is, I won't lie. Maybe it is like, okay, it's Scheherazade. Maybe I feel like it should be heard more, where I don't have to crank up the stereo. But anyway, what else? Yeah, I mean, this is Karen. Another great way to look at it is for all of us in the bassoon world, all of us. Um, and any instrument, don't be at the mercy of your instrument. What does that mean? It means we know that the low register tends to be sharp. We know that the low register, we don't always have as great control and beautiful attacks, maybe, as we might in other registers. And maybe in the tenor range, it tends to be flatter than not, right? And so let's not fall at the mercy or fall victim or be slaves of our instrument. And again, what I mean by that is some bassoons, like my bassoon happens to have a really flat D above the staff. But I can't say, and I'm sorry, many of you have heard me say this, ladies and gentlemen, please know I'm a good player. Just the bassoon, my bassoon is really flat in that note. So I'm sorry, that's just how you're going to hear it. They don't care. The people listening, that's going to go over their heads of like, hey, we just want to hear great music making, right? And we can't be like, hey, sorry, that low E in the beginning of Tchaikovsky 6 is kind of not easy. So can you cut us some slack, or can you know that like it might be a little louder than you expect, or might be a little sharp or flat or whatever you want to call it, like, for every instrument. So when I'm conducting, sometimes I hear then the tendencies of the bassoon, and I'm like smiling. I'm like, okay, like clearly, those notes are flat where you expect them in the tenor range, and clearly those notes are sharp where you expect them. Now, what I try not to do is also, I never want to presume. Sometimes we have conductors, guest conductors, who come into our orchestra, and they'll go like this to the horns. Horns, like before, in the first rehearsal, they haven't even played yet, and they're getting the hand. And the horns are like, what? We haven't even played yet. And it's like the conductor is just assuming it's going to be too loud. And I feel like that's a little unfair. Why don't we listen first? So I just want to say this, like, I might know the tendencies of bassoons, but of course, if it's right and it's great, I won't even hear it, and I won't even think that. But I mean, to me, those are the two main things: is make me forget what instrument it is. Don't be that, we can call it the caricature, and of the cartoony bassoons that we have come to know thanks to Mickey Mouse and broomsticks. Um, and I love the lyricism. And also, it's not just bassoon. For me, a pet peeve is for winds, brass, or any string or any instruments, is to know your role. Like if there's something else going on and you're too loud, just have again that the sense of knowing your role in the score. All right, that's it in terms of bassoon. But thanks, great question, Karen.
Yeah, we have two more questions, I think.
Okay.
The next one is from Barton Kane, and they ask, do you have any practicing advice or general words of wisdom for bassoonists starting this very strange school year?
Yes, great question. I would say, if you can, um, kind of do what you, I, for lack of a better way to say this, and I don't want to get in trouble with teachers out there who might have a syllabi or syllabus, but I want to say absolutely do what your teacher tells you to do in terms of prepare the things they ask of you. Whether he or she will say, hey, learn this A2 this week. Absolutely do that and learn your scales, learn this new concerto or solo piece, or learn these excerpts. But on top of that, because we're in an unusual place and time, take this opportunity to also kind of just do whatever you want. I'm going to say this, kind of do whatever the heck you want, meaning there's a piece you always wanted to learn, and this is what I'm encouraging my students these days. Why not? Like, you know, I, who knows when we'll ever get this again? Hopefully never. But we do find ourselves stuck at home a lot, and we have a lot of time. I am never one of those people anyway, and I don't mean this in any kind of weird, freakish, even boastful way. I'm not one of those people who spend a whole lot of time practicing. Please know, I'm not saying that, hey, look at me, I'm so super, like I've made it. I don't even like that term anyway. Made it. What does that even mean? But like, it doesn't mean that I got to where I got to in my career or life. not having practiced. I certainly don't mean that. And we all put in our times. We can call it the outliers of, the 10,000 hours total. Like even Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, and or uh, Raf, Nadal, my goodness. Um, and these people that we know who are so great, they put in those hours, even though they're super like gifted, of course, like in tennis or basketball. My point is, now during this time, it's not just a matter of like, oh, you have all this time, so you should definitely practice. My point is like to make sure you enjoy, you do things not just by assignments, not just by chore, not just by requirements, but to do things like, if you want, one given day, you're like, you know what, I'm just going to pick out this piece. I haven't played it in so long, and it might be a piece you played in high school or before that. Go for it. Why not? Like, take out an old friend. If it's something you've never played before and you've always had curiosity and interest, there's no harm in like getting your feet wet a little bit, because nothing should be learned anyway overnight. We know this about music. Nothing can be, there's no cramming in music. You can't pull an all-nighter and ace a history test and in music. You cannot pull an all-nighter and ace, I mean, sure, we can do things and we can probably get away with things. I've had students over the years too who were really great at sight reading, and I think they would try to get away with it and show up in a lesson, and I still kind of knew that they were and they would be like, I don't understand, I didn't miss a note. I'm like, I can kind of tell you don't know this piece. And they're like, well, what gave it away? And I would like turn to Stan. I was like, okay, sing me the second theme. And they'd be like, I was like, right. It's like, you probably picked this up yesterday afternoon because you're a great sight reader and you have great chops and great facility. And like, and they're like, I still don't understand how you know. I was like, well, again, practicing is not just a matter of like, learning a piece quickly. Practicing is internalizing. Practicing is absorbing and getting to know something. I've said this too over the summer, as you guys know. I don't like the word practicing. I like the word familiarizing. So there's a difference. So if you haven't played the Jolivet Concerto yet and you haven't learned it and you've always wanted to, and your teacher's like, no, you're way too young. I get that. I understand that, and I want to respect that. But if on your own you're like, unless it physically harms you, which please don't do that. Like if it'll give you tendonitis or if it'll chop your bust your chops because it'll like hurt your trying to get a high F out. No, please don't. It's like working out and you're like, I'm gonna lift 300 pounds and I'm not there yet, but like, I don't mean that. Please know that. But I think there might be something in terms of, well, I'd like to learn it someday. And there's something beautiful about this long arc or arch in the learning curve of that piece. Like Mozart, I'm still learning, and it's a lifelong journey. And I know the next time I'll play it will be slightly different. Not because I'm going to try to play it differently, but I'm going to be different. I'm hopefully have taken every day something different from wherever, whether it's about Mozart or about music and phrasing or just about life. And then we now will bring that to our art and do it that way. So the other thing that's important during this time is it's so hard to stay connected, but find a way. I know we're all zoomed out, especially now that school's starting. We're going to get even more this way with classes. Um, Take walks with masks safely, unless you're out alone in nature, which is fine. And if you come close to someone, then politely and the etiquette, just put your mask on for a few seconds. And it's important to get out of like just being in a cave or the four walls. And the last thing I'll say is, I really, really believe this more now than ever. I think everyone in the world, I look at you, Joshua, I look at you, Teddy, and all of you, all of those who might be tuning in, we all, I unless I'm completely like mistaken, I really feel like everyone wants to be relevant in the world. Um, and if you think of it, the opposite is no one wants to be irrelevant, right? No one wants to be irrelevant. I don't ever want to feel that way. Um, you know, I had a moment this week when I was triggered, we can call it that, use that word, where I was emailing some stuff that was important, like administrative speaking. And then I asked a question, and then a day went by and no one answered. And then they're still all talking, about other stuff, and people are chiming in and stuff. And then the third day came by, and I'm asking my question again. Can someone please, And I felt like, am I not here? Like it's like, and I know they're not doing it on purpose, but again, it's like tiny little thing of feeling like, wow, it's so weird how that made me feel like irrelevant. And I know I'm irrelevant to the group. I know that I'm respected. I know that I respect them, and they feel that too. But just that tiny little thing that might have been just a miscue or just something that they might have thought, well, um, maybe they'll get to it. We're all busy. I don't answer stuff right away too. So I also have to understand that. So the point is, how do we stay relevant today while we're made to stay home? So I just want to let all of you know you are relevant, and it's important for you to hear that. It's absolutely important for you to hear that. And Joshua, I was not trying to, I don't blow smoke ever, and I certainly was not trying to blow smoke, but I meant what I said. That I think you're a great player, a beautiful musician, and you seem like such a really nice, warm person, really great guy. And like if and again, I'm not doing that to try to feed any ego of anyone's, nor am I doing it to try to make you feel relevant. I'm not saying it because of that, because again, I don't blow smoke. But my point is, if I came in and if I didn't say one thing, like it might come across later, they're like, wow, that's interesting. He had nothing to say at all about my playing, had nothing to say, right? It'd be kind of like, yeah, you can make that F sharp like this, and you can maybe hold on to that note, and that was it, and that was it, which could be fine. And I don't like, I'm not against teachers who might do that, but maybe this is out for all the teachers out there too. Is like just as you would like to be hopefully respected by your students and revered hopefully by your students, equally your students really care a lot about what you think of them, and to give that feedback. I know you already do that, and this is not a lecture. Please know that, to all of you up there, this is not a lecture. But just to understand now more than ever, it's even more so, more important than ever, to hear that stuff, to feel relevant while we're like not in touch with anything else that's going on. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I know there's one more.
Yes, there's one more kind of a related topic. So Rachel Parker asked, how has your own motivation slash inspiration changed in light of the pandemic?
Another great question, and very similar. Yeah, it's again finding those things. I don't want to get philosophical. That's not even the right word. I don't want to get spiritual here. I mean, that's kind of a funny word as well, where people will be like, "Uh-oh," and I don't want people to think that way. But I've been at a place and in my life where, you know what, and I'm just going to go out and say it because I'm not going to be apologetic about it either. I'm in a place in my life where I just want to come from a place where I make decisions in my life more from a higher, we can call it love-based state rather than fear-based. And often is the case when we're in a fear-based state, either through a worry or insecurity. All these things are coming up right now, of course, during pandemia, right? We all know this. Like we're worried, we're insecure, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainties about our health, about the future, about our livelihoods, about our industry, even. Like, I mean, it's so much of this is absolutely personal. Um, and so we have all of that in terms of fear-based states. So I'm trying to make the decisions that I make in my life not from a fear-based state, a fear-based place, but more from a love-based place. A love-based place could mean things like fulfillment and joy and peace and all that stuff, to try to like again, please forgive me for those of you who are like, oh God, he's like, this is way too much. This is too spiritual and too philosophical or too this or that. But again, like I'm saying, for whatever reason, right now, here today, maybe in a few years, I might go back and I might be like, I can't believe I ever said that publicly. But here, I don't feel apologetic. I really don't. I feel like, you know what, this is how I feel, and I'm feeling very like it's basically the saying to all of you is be yourselves. We've heard this, and being authentic, right? We all should do this. And often when we're not, it's either because we're trying to impress someone or trying to put on an image, social media, like how many of us are looking for those likes, you know, like, is that really who we are? Like we need that sort of feedback. We need that pat on the back. We need that sense of like acceptance. Is that really what it is? Then you're not going to really be yourself, because you're going to start playing to like, oh, well, that didn't get much likes. Let me do something that will get much likes. But then you're not really staying true to being yourself and being authentic. So again, back to this topic at hand, I'm trying to not be apologetic because I am just trying to come from a place of fulfillment in general, rather than looking for something external on the outside to give me fulfillment. And that's so hard not to do. It's really hard not to like look for, again, external approval or whatever it is for me to feel enriched and fulfilled. So I want to maybe nudge all of you to do the same out there, is to maybe try to find a way to feel that feeling of fulfillment, even during these times, as hard as it is. And you'll find you can create so much more. You'll find that you'll be able to like go to a place that you're actually aspiring to be at, rather than out of defense or out of self-protection or out of insecurities. Does that make sense? So this way we can now create from a place of instead of seeking, you're already feeling fulfillment. So now you'll be able to be creative in a really like a much more, for lack of a better word, beautiful space and beautiful place. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to apologize and also not apologize for sharing that own bit of personal thing of what I'm going through right now. And that's where I'm at. And that's for me. That's not for everyone, but that's for me. Again, Joshua, thank you. Teddy, thank you again for all of this. You're amazing as a high school student, right? In Oregon, to even like to do this. So, and also, I'm not saying that so you feel relevant, by the way. I just thank you, because you're actually giving a place for people to be relevant in the world. So I applaud you and thank you guys so much. Really, thank you. Hang in there, be safe, stay well, keep your spirits up, and try to make all your life decisions if you can. It's not that easy. From a love-based place, love-based state, and just yeah. I would just like to say, do what gives you joy. Find the things that get you up in the morning. What does get you up during this kind of time? Well, if you don't know because it's pandemic and you're like quarantined, then find it. And if you still don't find it right away, that's okay too. Then you'll get to that place of like, oh, it might be a light bulb or it might be a gradual thing. Okay, well, thank you. I went way above the time that I asked, and I probably people cut off way long ago, which is fine. So again, thank you guys. Love and gratitude.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I know that
Thank you.
everyone else watching, we're really appreciative of it. Super generous of your time. Speaking of generosity, I do want to talk about our sponsor, Barton Kane. They're amazing people, amazing cane. So if you are ever in the need of GSP cane, please check them out. You can see their link right below our faces right here. So they have a huge variety of different shapes, profiles, types of cane. Please check them out. Amazing quality cane. A lot of our artists have used it. I use it myself. So yeah, please check them out. And
Great.
with that, that concludes our theme. Thank you so much, Joshua, for playing. Thank you so much, Danny, for being here and giving your time to us. And yeah, so everyone stay tuned for next week's artist, and we will see you soon.
Thank you again. All the best. Take care.